So welcome everyone, noswaith dda i'r webinar heno. Welcome to this evening's webinar titled Agroforestry and its benefits for livestock health and welfare. I'm Rhys Evans, so I work for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. We're a farmer-led organisation that champions sustainable farming that goes side by side with looking after nature and the environment. I'm also a farmer myself. I farm with my family in Rhydymain, near Dolgellau, in Meirionnydd in North Wales. But that's enough about me. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by our two guest speakers, Dr. Lindsay Wistons and Geraint Jones. So Dr. Lindsay Wistons is a senior livestock researcher at the Organic Research Centre. Her research interests include livestock behaviour, welfare, human-animal relationships, and how ecologically resilient systems can enhance all of that. And current research includes investigating the role of trees in temperature regulation, body maintenance benefits, and the nutritional and medicinal opportunities from browse, as well as methods of feeding and processing tree fodder as well. So there's a lot of expertise there, and it's great to have you here, Lindsay. Thank you for joining us. And likewise for Geraint. Geraint is the farm forestry and farm woodland specialist for Farming Connect. So Geraint's role involves working with Farming Connect's demonstration network, their demonstration network of farms, to facilitate knowledge transfer for farmers and foresters on a variety of topics. And he aims to support businesses in the farming sector to develop and increase efficiency and profitability, while also helping identify opportunities for environmental and economic prosperity. So marrying up that sort of the productivity business benefits with looking after the environment as well, which is great. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Lindsay, who will be giving a presentation on the benefits of agroforestry for livestock health and welfare. We'll aim to keep it around sort of 45 minutes. Don't worry if you go over a bit, Lindsay. It's only because it's such an interesting topic and a lot to go through. But over to you. Diolch yn fawr.
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. I'll try very hard to stick to time, but as you say, there's so much to say. And thanks for inviting me to take part in this webinar. Before I start talking about the trees, I just want to explain what I mean when I'm talking about animal welfare. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, when we're talking about welfare in its entirety, yes, we're talking about physiological health, but we're also talking about emotional health and the ability for animals to act as the animal that they were born to be. So showing these natural innate behavior patterns. And by caring for these three different levels of animal welfare, we give them the best opportunity to stay in balance, both as a social animal and in harmony with their landscape. So the benefits from trees can be both direct and indirect. And here in the top left-hand corner, you can see a picture of a tree in the summer of 2018, which I think we can all remember as a very difficult summer with very little grass available. And in fact, the farm behind this tree had to sell all its stock off the land because they'd gone through their winter hay sources. If you look under the apple tree in this garden, you can see that that's really the only place where there's green grass, but there's a bit of clover in the foreground. What the tree is doing here is not just shading from solar radiation, but it's also catching the moisture from evapotranspiration processes. So keeping that moisture down at a level where it can be useful in terms of grass growth, but also benefits that air by cooling it beyond cutting out the sunlight. In contrast, the image below that, we can see a picture of a downy birch up in Scotland, and you can see that even without the canopy, without the leaves, that this canopy has a warming effect on the ground below, making it easier for these outwintered sheep to find something to eat, and also offering a warmer place for animals to lie down if they're outwintered. And in fact, the ground temperature can be as much as 6 degrees warmer under tree canopy, so promoting earlier grass growth also when we get into the next growing season. The picture on the right-hand side at the bottom denotes an ash silvopastoral system that was established in Northern Ireland about 30 years ago. And this particular trial has demonstrated that in a very wet landscape, the presence of the roots from these rows of trees has increased the grazing season by an average of 15 weeks. So keeping the animals out for longer, keeping the grass growing for longer, and keeping the pasture healthy for longer. And I should say that apart from 3 weeks at the beginning of the season, it was really towards the end of the season that the grazing was extended. And I borrowed this slide from Carmen from Rothamsted Institute, where she had a look at all of the trials that have been done on carbon sequestration in different farming systems. And it looks as if silvopastoral systems have the biggest and best opportunity for carbon sequestration when compared to all other styles of farming. So if we look now at the benefits that trees can bring directly to cattle, so I talked about emotional welfare, and here we can see that the presence of trees increases their emotional welfare. It strengthens social cohesion and bonding. The animals stay closer together amongst the trees when compared to in open pasture. And the biggest proportion of their social interactions are positive. So I'm particularly talking about social licking, and this is the behavior that they use to strengthen bonds between each other and to maintain social harmony. So within a silvopastoral system, this constitutes about 80% of their behavior, and it's around 40% in open pasture. When the animal is being licked by another animal, their heart rate goes down, which further helps with that sense of well-being. And there's some evidence that this can be extended to the human-animal relationship as well. Some work, for example, done in Brazil has demonstrated that it's easier for the humans to come and interact with cattle. And now I've been doing this for quite some time and been talking about this. I have farmers come up to me and say that they have absolutely noted this difference and that their cattle are calmer to work with in amongst the trees. And similarly, in terms of emotional welfare, body care brings around a certain amount of emotional welfare. And we're finding that animals rubbing have a similar reduction in heart rate as they do when they're being licked by another animal. And you can see by these images that when there's a variety of shapes and sizes and positions, that the animals can access pretty much most body parts and maintain them. And it's quite important that we don't underestimate the value of this behavior to farmed animals. When they have access to rubbing posts, they show this behavior every single day. Similarly to humans, they carry out body care as a daily behavior pattern. And in doing this, they can clean away dead skin, dust, dead hair, and by doing this, they can help maintain their thermal comfort. So it actively aids thermoregulation, but they can also get rid of external parasites and grass seeds, for example, that can penetrate the skin. And there's research that shows that when animals have access to rubbing posts, they have fewer ticks compared to those that don't have access. And I've also been told by some farmers here in the UK that when the sheep have access to rubbing posts, they get fewer animals cast. And of course, consequential risks, for example, the crows pecking out their eyes, these kinds of things are reduced in that scenario. So if we consider now the benefits of having trees in the landscape and for the animals' thermal comfort, just wanted to really take a step back here and show what's happening with the animal when the temperature changes. So with all warm-blooded animals, we've all got a core temperature, and the body works to maintain this core temperature. So we're in this optimal metabolic state, if you like, where our metabolic rates are low or minimal. This is, in evolutionary terms, this is a very neat system because all metabolic processes produce heat as a byproduct, and it's this heat that is used to maintain our thermal comfort. So it's a low energy state that the body can maintain itself. If you look at the edges of the thermoneutral zone, you'll see that there is a small window, if you like, before an animal reaches a critical temperature. This is where they shift their behavior patterns. So if it's sunny, they'll go seek shade. And the intention is that they maintain this thermal comfort or thermoneutrality, if you like, so that it's not costing them any energy to do this. If those resources are not available to them, then they have to employ other mechanisms, and these mechanisms cost energy. So, for example, if it's getting too cold, they'll start to, for example, shiver or raise the coat up in an attempt to trap body heat, and also start to increase their energy intake. So their food intake will increase their metabolic heat, and that will help maintain the core temperature. On the opposite side, when it's getting too hot, then they start to, for example, to pant, or they will also reduce their food intake. So this is an attempt to stop adding to that metabolic heat and thus keep the internal temperatures warm. And balanced. I should say that this is a movable feast. So this thermoneutral zone can be different from animal to animal and depends on a lot of things such as coat color, body size, reproductive status, age, and of course how adapted they are to that landscape. If we think about cold stress first, I'm not really going to spend too much time on this element, but most of the research that's been done here has been done on lambs and lamb survival. And that's probably no surprise when research demonstrates that the loss of lambs at this time can be reduced by at least 30%. It's quite hard to separate malnutrition and cold stress from here because, of course, the lamb getting up and feeding is part of their survival. But if we think about a small lamb being born, it's born wet, so it's losing cold very quickly, and it has very little to no resources available to generate heat at that point in its life. And it can lose up to 10 degrees of body heat in that first half hour of life. So it becomes critical that the mother is a good mother. But if she's a mother of twins or triplets, then the environment itself becomes increasingly important for that lamb's survival. And we also know that if the shelter is good and you can keep the ewe and the lambs in that space for between 1 and 3 days, depending on how many lambs there are, you improve the bond between lamb and mother, and that then increases survival to weaning. So you have these sort of 2 bites at the cherry for keeping a lamb alive to the point of weaning. Now, that's not to say that cold stress isn't important for all animals of all ages, of course. And I put this bit of a shocker image in. This is not from the UK, this is from Nebraska. And this is the kind of landscape where buffaloes have adapted to live in. So this Angus is not adapted to these kinds of landscapes. I put it in to remind us that we're not completely free of cold stress and losses to cold stress, because of course back in 2017-18 we had those 2 storms, the Beast from the East and Storm Emma, come in at pretty quickly, one after the other. And across the UK, we lost several 100,000 animals to those storms. So we're not out of the woods in terms of adult animals succumbing to cold stress. We talk a lot about putting trees into the landscape for these purposes, and there is a lot to recommend having specifically designed silvopastoral systems for animal management. But that doesn't mean to say that the trees existing in the landscape can't also offer some benefits. And here are two commercial plantations, one in Scotland and one in Wales, that are used for just this purpose. So on the right-hand side, the farmer in Wales has incorporated stiles into the fencing around this plantation. And when storms are coming in, he opens the stiles and the cattle go in and shelter in there. And similarly, in the Cairngorms in Scotland, these trees now will not be harvested commercially. They more than do their job in terms of keeping the animals sheltered, and particularly the ewes up to lambing. This system has been so successful that the farmer then became a convert to silvopastoral systems and planted the system below specifically to encourage early spring grass for the ewes to produce milk on, and for the lambs to shelter in amongst these trees. And this has resulted in the farmer being able to move away from the black-faced sheep to a more commercial, productive sheep. So he's got clean ewes and Texel tups, and he's able to produce these sheep and lambs on less money, in fact, than in the more exposed landscape. So perhaps of all of the benefits that trees can bring, at least on a global scale, the offer of shade and the reduction of heat stress for the livestock is the single most important thing that they can do. There's been quite a lot of research done, particularly on dairy cattle, of the outcomes of heat stress. And as we learn more and more, we're finding that they are heat stressed at much lower levels, much lower temperatures than we used to think. So, for example, with dairy cows, they're already looking for shade at around 18 degrees. And of course, this will be determined again by coat colour, reproductive status, yield status, the type of food that they're being fed on. All of these things will have an impact. But even at that level, if we've got a milking dairy cow, even low heat stress can result in several litres of milk lost every day, where she's reduced perhaps her feed intake and she's coping. That doesn't mean that they can't recover. Typically, they do recover at night time. But weather predictions, as the climate changes, is indicating that this colder weather in the nighttime, we are going to lose that as we move towards a warmer climate. So this ability to recover during the nighttime will be lost to the animals. As heat stress increases, they start to employ these other mechanisms. So they come out of the thermoneutral zone and they start to respond and start to make trade-offs. So the things that they do is to cut down or out non-life affirming systems. And this is effectively the digestive tract and the reproductive tract. So they reduce their feed intake to stop creating metabolic heat, and that disrupts the rumen microbes and also starts to cause metabolic disorders. At the same time that this is happening, in an attempt to increase body cooling, they'll redirect around half of the blood that services the gut, and this will move out towards the skin. The result for that is that they're left with a leaky gut. So the toxins that are normally kept within the digestive tract are now able to leak into the blood, and they start to cause an inflammation cascade. So, for example, research done in Italy has shown that cows that are suffering from heat stress are also more likely to get mastitis. And with the metabolic disorders as well, there's an increase in lameness levels in these heat-stressed cows. So I said about the reproductive tract also being closed down. And of course, that makes sense that they're not investing energy in a future generation when the current generation is compromised and at risk. So this results in reduced or no estrus expression. And if the animal is, I'm going to say in calf, because most of this research has been done with cattle, but it equally applies to any other animal. But if they are in calf, then the embryo growth is compromised, as is the development of the fetus. And this results in a smaller calf being born, but from the cow's side, she's also producing less milk and less colostrum, which is of a poorer quality, and particularly the protein level is compromised. So the story doesn't really end there, sadly. So we've got these smaller calves with compromised development, and that includes their organ sizes. So all of the organs that are related to immunity, such as the spleen, are also smaller. So these animals are starting from a more risky place, if you like, in terms of health. And if that wasn't bad enough, we know that we have a window where the animals, these calves, can take in colostrum, and the digestive tract is open. These are very specific cells that allow these big immunoglobulin proteins to pass directly through the digestive tract. And this window is closed with the natural death of these cells, and then they're replaced by normal cells that line the gut. What we now know is that with heat-stressed cows, these these important cells that allow the passive transfer are already dying before the calf is born. So not only is it poorer quality colostrum, the window to get it into the calf to pass on this passive immunity, that is also shorter. So it's really no surprise that the cull rates are higher and mortality is higher in these calves. And over time, you can see these negative impacts of a single cow being heat stressed into the third generation, her third generation. So we've not done any financial analysis of this in the UK, but they have done so in the US. And they've calculated that on an annual basis for beef cattle, the cost of heat stress to the industry is around $400 million. Now, in terms of dairy cattle, there are calculations of between $1 billion and $2 billion lost every single year to heat stress. So it demonstrates how much of an impact it has on the industry. But let's remember that all of this is based on essentially poor animal welfare. The good news is that if we incorporate shade into the landscape, and here we're talking specifically about putting trees into the landscape, we can reduce around 58% of the solar radiation. We hold that moisture from evapotranspiration processes down at where it can be useful, but further cooling that landscape. And we find that animals in these systems are more likely to maintain their normal behavior patterns, which includes feeding behavior. And they're also more likely to use the landscape more evenly. So in terms of production, for example, this translates into beef cattle finishing 3 weeks earlier than cattle with no access to shade, for example. And the benefits of them using their landscape more evenly, of course, is we get less of this camping behaviour where we've got a few trees in the landscape and they're overusing these trees. We get this uneven deposition of nutrients across the field. If we turn our attention now to trees as a source of fodder, well, all of our domestic livestock all browse to some degree, and that's from chickens upwards. But if we focus here on cattle, sheep and goats, we can see that across a whole year that browse constitutes part of their diet. So for cattle, it's around 12%, for sheep, it's 20%, and for goats, it's 60%. But there can be times of the year when increases quite dramatically. And you can see here for cattle, that's 55%, and for sheep, it's 76%. And these times might be early spring when there are really tasty shoots, but it can equally be the height of summer when the grass is compromised and perhaps the most meaningful forage available to them is the browse. And I think we're all pretty comfortable seeing what happens when we put animals from one field into a fresh field. And really, the first thing they do is check out the available browse. And you can see here from these two images just how hard they'll work to access a little bit of browse. And in this case, the sheep is browsing on hawthorn and the cow is browsing on some elm. So in some of the research that we did back in the early 2020s was analysing the nutritional content of 3 species of trees across 3 different sites and in 2 different seasons to see just how that changes, not just from species to species, but whether the soil and whether the season have an impact on nutritional content. The 2 bars here are for growing lamb requirements, so 20 kilo and 40 kilo lambs with different requirements. And if we look at the top right-hand corner at the crude protein, you can see that these 3 trees could offer meaningful protein supplements. But let's remember that this is crude protein and that the presence of tannins will have a part to play here. And I also want to highlight, because I haven't put this into this particular talk, but a tree is not a tree in terms of preference browsing. So we've included older, and you can see that actually it's got a good protein content and a good energy content, but this is a tree that is not that attractive as a browse tree. But it gets included a lot because it's a nitrogen fixing tree and may be useful in other ways. But I just wanted to point out that when left to their own devices, animals typically don't like to browse on older unless it's very young. One thing I wanted to note just here is that, look, there is a seasonal difference in protein content. So earlier in the year, here in June, that the protein is significantly higher to the September quantities. So I mentioned that there were tannins present here, and whilst tannins are part of the suite of chemicals that plants produce as an anti-nutritional factor, years ago we used to think that that was exclusively a bad thing, but now we know differently, and research shows that a percentage of condensed tannins in the diet, so really between 1 and 4% of total dry matter, can have a positive effect, and particularly on protein quality, where the tannins are binding to the proteins, preventing them from being digested in the rumen, but when they reach the more acidic abomasum, these bonds are broken and they're effectively delivering high quality rumen bypass protein. We also know that tannins can have a beneficial effect on gaseous emissions. So there's evidence to show that methane is reduced when there is tannins in the diet. This particular trial was looking at willow and comparing that to lucerne. We also know that it has a beneficial effect on nitrous oxide levels. Now, it doesn't reduce the nitrous oxide per se, but it transfers it from urine to feces, and that's a more stable form. So in the same bit of research, we also looked at mineral content, and there were many more minerals than this, but I've just pulled these 4 out. And again, it's compared to sheep requirements. So these are upper and lower ranges for all sheep. And you can see that they can be meaningful supplements for the sheep's needs. So on the whole, for minerals, species is the strongest single influence for mineral content, and this is followed by location. So in terms of species, I pulled up the cobalt and the zinc, and these indicate that the goat willow was a particularly good source for both of these minerals. And some of you may be aware of the Innovative Farmers trial that was looking at using willow as a supplement, a cobalt supplement for lambs that had been weaned and were requiring this cobalt supplement at the end of the summer. And this was a successful way of putting this into the landscape. In terms of location, the selenium is an example of this. So the oak one, the willow one, and the alder one in this trial, they all came from Berkshire. So this was the Organic Research Centre's farm in Berkshire, indicating that the soils were high in selenium there, and that didn't translate across the other two sites, which were near Bangor and in Leicestershire. The iodine I've included because this is one of the seasonal differences. So you can see across each of the sites and the species that the level of iodine is higher in the later sample, so in the September sample. And I suppose what this indicates is that although we can get an idea of just how trees might supplement the landscapes, if you like, we do need to take these other things into consideration. So we might have a general idea of where we might find these minerals and build resilience into our systems, but we also need to know these local level factors, and particularly the soil. So following on in this mineral narrative, this is another piece of research that we did at Site 1, if you like, at Elm Farm. And this was looking at how resilient the minerals were in stored tree fodder. So this was branches that were picked in the July of one year and then analysed at that point. And then they were kept over winter and analysed the following March, so a full 9 months after they were picked. And if you have a look at the calcium levels for the elm here, I've pulled them up in blue just to show how storage has influenced the level of minerals. And of course, these minerals are not growing. So other things are degrading over this time, so that the proportion of the mineral is higher in the sample 9 months later. And what this demonstrates is that this is a long-term resilient source of these minerals. I also wanted to point out the red. So I've pulled up the levels of phosphorus, calcium and sulfur in the goat willow, in the fresh goat willow. And notice that the phosphorus and calcium are in a relatively handy 2-to-1 ratio, which of course is the desired ratio. And then bring your attention to the image on the left-hand side, this rather grotesque image of the steer with a dead rabbit in its mouth. So this steer is being grazed on moorland, which is particularly poor in the minerals that I highlighted, and it's not being supplemented. And what this demonstrates is that this steer is aware of the imbalance, and it might not know to go looking for the rabbit, for those source of minerals that can be found in the bones, but it is motivated to go and find somewhere that it can get these minerals from. So there can be a lot of trial and error in this process. But once it's ingested the minerals in the bone deposits, then it will get that positive reinforcement feedback. And if it's in this situation at a later date, then it will go looking for these bones. But this is not normal behavior. It just becomes normal in an abnormal environment. And I would suggest that the kind of thing to do here, at least, is to allow a few scrubby goat willow to thrive for these animals to go and browse on. I talked about tannins beforehand, And we can come back to the benefits of condensed tannins again when we consider parasite loads. And we know that from sheep with heavy parasite burdens, if they're given access to plants with condensed tannins, they will preferentially select them and they are able to reduce their burdens by 50%. The really important thing here is that throughout evolutionary history, there is no evidence of the parasites developing any resistance to condensed tannins. So although the condensed tannins are not as effective as chemical treatments, two things they have in their favor is that the parasites are not developing resistance, and if they are put into the landscape of the animal, they don't have to wait until they've got a burden, but they can maintain and manage their parasite loads in an ongoing way. The other thing that's present in trees, and willow has particularly got a good name for this because of the levels, but all plants have salicylic acid in them because they have a lot of jobs, as for example, as growth promoters and as a pheromone to warn plants that they're under attack. But the benefits of these acids for us is that they are a painkiller, and that's what we use for aspirin, or at least a chemical copy of aspirin, salicylic acid. But it's also antifungal, it's antimicrobial, and so it has a lot of medicinal benefits. There isn't that much research done directly on salicin from plants, but if they are given salicin as an additive, we can see that milk health, udder health, is better over a whole lactation. And this has particularly been done with goats, where they've been given some salicin at the beginning of their lactation, and the benefits are retained throughout the whole lactation. So not only are they producing more milk, but they're succumbing to mastitis less often when when they've been given these doses of salicin at the beginning. So there's a lot of promise. What we need to understand better is the lag time of salicin. So if we're giving it as a medicine, then it seems to act quicker. But if we're giving it in tree form or plant form, it takes longer to act. So we need to better understand these actions. So if we're thinking about putting trees into the animal's landscape, well, the simplest method is to allow them to browse directly. And if we're doing that, then we need to know what their browse heights are. For cattle, this is around 2 meters height. For sheep, it's around 1.2 meters height. And for goats, it's non-existent. They're called vertical browsers. If they can climb it, they'll eat it effectively. But I did want to note that these really are maximum heights, and you can see that that these animals that are browsing here, they've got their head stretched up, and yes, they can access it, but this isn't a particularly comfortable way of feeding. And we know that from feeding silage at a horizontal height, if you like, the animals are producing much less saliva when their head is higher than ground level. And I popped in this image in the bottom to show you that these sheep that were browsing and grazing in this field, they had free access to these willows, and they were pretty much browsing up to around 60 centimeters. I went out with a tape measure just to see, and it was almost a straight line at 60 centimeters. So although they had free access above that point, they were choosing to browse below. And that's not to say that, that hedgerows don't offer food beyond that point, but they're choosing to keep themselves in that relaxed body position. So other methods of offering fodder require some effort, some interaction, if you like. And the quickest way of doing this is a cut and drop fresh. So in the top left-hand corner, we've got a very well-established silvopastoral system where they are now in the act of thinning out canopy, thinning out trees at the bottom, and every tree that's felled, primarily for wood burning fuel, they fell them in the summer and then they allow the animals to browse them clean, and then they take away the clean stems at that point. The next option is to cut and carry fresh, and this is typically used in farming systems where there are small numbers of animals that are kept closer to home. And then we get into more into storage and preserved fodder. And this requires specific management of trees. But the image on the left-hand side is what we call tree hay. So this is just dried. But this is a dairy goat farmer in Belgium, and every year he collects branches and dries them down as tree hay. You can see on a flatbed trailer under a tarpaulin. But we're also learning that we can ensile tree fodder, and there may be potential at some point to maybe go down the pelleting route. Yeah, I think that's me. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you so much. That was great. And yeah, for me anyway, it really kind of really demonstrated the benefits of trees for livestock. And I think in Wales in general and probably, across the UK, there's this kind of raging debate around, the relationship between food production and trees. And, it's been quite a divisive conversation, particularly in Wales across, the last couple of years, mainly as a result of, of government policy. Um, but I think it just shows that kind of what you've presented today kind of really kind of debunks this narrative that kind of it's a choice between trees and producing food, and there is a way to do it together. And actually there's a lot of business efficiency, productivity, livestock welfare benefits for trees kind of beyond maybe the kind of some of the primary motives for tree planting at the moment, which is more kind of environmental. So that was excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Geraint, we'll hand over to you to share your screen. Whilst you're doing that, the question has come in, Lindsay, that you potentially could answer fairly quickly. Um, you mentioned alder, having good forage kind of potential and nutrition, but not kind of not widely preferred maybe by livestock. So the question is kind of, is that the reason that, because alder is unpalatable, and is that the same, across animal species, sheep, cattle, goats, and the like?
Yes, it does seem to be. Um, it's not really clear why it's as unpalatable as it is, given that its nutritional profile is pretty good. So there may be some reasons why that is. It might be the texture, the actual feel of the leaf in the mouth, because we know that plants employ sort of mechanistic defenses, if you like. Some can be hairy, some spiky. I mean, a classic example is holly for that, but actually animals will still try to eat the holly. So it's more than that. It works across the species, so it's typically the only tree that even deer will leave alone. Um, Having said that, when it's very young, so occasionally I have conversations with farmers where an alder has fallen down and then started to regrow from the base, and that very young regrowth can be browsed. Now, I should say also that in that photograph I showed where the animals were browsing up to 60 centimetres, there is actually a little bit of alder in there and it has been browsed. But when I went and had a look at the willow, I could see the willow, they were browsing on the stem as well. But with the alder, they were very careful not to touch the stem. And so there's a lot going on with alder that we don't understand yet.
Well, yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, the kind of the stages of the growth kind of can affect palatability and everything like that. And I think the more we look at kind of planting, the right tree in the right place for the right reason, kind of the more research that we do kind of can inform farmers, kind of where and what species we plant. So keep up the good work, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that.
Actually, just to add to that, and I'm sorry, but it's quite important to say that it doesn't mean that alder doesn't have its place. And in Ireland, for example, where they've been reclaiming rush, very wet rush land, they've started planting with alder, and it does an absolutely excellent job in this landscape. And as they're reclaiming the pasture, of course, you can start to shift the species. So you can maybe fell some of the alder, which is really good firewood, and then start to replace these with perhaps more beneficial or more attractive trees. So you can it still has its place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, Lindsay. Geraint, ti 'di bod yn disgwyl yn am yn Edgar. Geraint's been patiently waiting. So hand over to Geraint to talk about some of the work that Farming Connect has been doing with farmers and the kind of benefit of tree planting, namely on sort of dairy systems. So drosodd i ti, Geraint. Diolch ti.
Noswaith dda, diolch yn fawr am y gwahoddiad. Ti'n clywed fi? Dach chi'n clywed fi'n iawn? Dach chi'n clywed fi'n iawn?
Yeah, dwi'n clywed ti. All good.
Ti'n gweld y sgrin?
Dwi'n gweld the screen. I can see the screen. It's not in presentation mode yet, but I can see the PowerPoint presentation anyway.
Okay. Dwi'n yn gweld ti ochr o fi am ryw reswm. Dwi wedi rhannu'r sgrin. Dach chi'n gweld y...
Yeah, ti di rhannu'r sgrin. Dwi'n meddwl bod ti just angen clicio, play from beginning, top left. A dyla hwnna ddangos just y sleid.
Dwi'n yn gweld y presentation. Cwbl dwi'n gweld ydy'r logo chi, Nature Friendly Farming, pen fi.
Hold on, bear with me. Falle cer i view a mynd i speaker. Ti eisiau fi trio rhannu'r cyflwyniad?
Can I say, Geraint, if you go down bottom right on your screen, where you can increase the screen, just before then, you'll see a little box with a drop down line. If you click on that, that will put you into presentation mode. So I can see you're currently on 65%.
Bottom right, you say?
Yeah, bottom right. Where your screen size is, just to the left of there, if you click on that, you'll get presentation mode.
Okay, let me try it.
Sod's law, isn't it? We had an IT tech run beforehand and everything worked perfectly.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and share again.
Cool. Yeah, go for it. Take your time, Geraint. In the meantime, we maybe look at some of the other questions. Oh no, I think
Can you see that?
that's okay now. Yeah.
Iawn, sorry am hynna, dim gwybod beth
No
ddigwyddodd.
worries.
I don't know what happened. Fel yn dweud, noswaith dda, chi gyd. So, good evening. I'm going to be talking about a project we undertook on one of the demonstration network, our farms at Kilford Farm in Denbigh, about integrating trees and pasture to optimise milk production and cow health and welfare. But specifically, we were investigating heat stress in the dairy cows. So it's an important environment element of incorporating grazing and woodland management to the farm, and economic benefits to the dairy business as well. And I'm always advocating to farmers that they should plant trees because they want to plant trees and for a purpose. So there's a lot of good evidence come out of the project, which I'll go into now. And also to look at more marginal areas on the farm and field corners where we can put trees to work. So the effects of rising temperatures on dairy cows were monitored in the Focus Farm project, and Dr. Tom Chamberlain was the consultant we used. He's done a lot of very, very good work and been analysing the data that we've been collecting at Kilford and has been able to calculate the outcomes. So what do we do? The objectives we were looking at the measured climate conditions on a typical grazing farm in Wales. Conditions would be measured in the grazing pastures and the cow sheds and in shade and tree canopy. Using existing algorithms to predict potential milk yield losses and hence estimated financial losses, which I'll go into further on. And assess the potential for modern technology. Ruminal boluses by SmaxTex was the ones we used, and to assess heat stress risks in real time. So the Evans family, David and Dilwyn Evans, produced milk from a 470 cow Holstein Norwegian Red Frisian crossbreds at Kilford. They've been working with us at Farming Connect to investigate the value of trees and hedgerows as shade and shelter for the stock. And from February through to late September, early October, their herd grazes rotationally on a 330 hectare farm, with a major part of that farm being the grazing platform. We, as Lindsay alluded to, heat stress, especially in all livestock, but in dairy cows, is a growing problem, causes significant reduction in production, profitability, and sustainability as well, and can be a significant welfare problem. So historically, much of the heat stress work that's been done and the studies we've been gleaning information from studies in southern states of America, with less work carried out on grazed cows in temperature conditions such as those found in Wales. So this project, we sought to assess heat stress risks in grazing conditions and to assess the value of trees in providing shade and shelter. So what we did, this is a photograph of the cows in the barn, where heat stress monitoring devices installed in the cow sheds, in the shade of a tree in a grazing platform, and in full sun on the fence line in open field. We measured humidity and temperature and the radiant heat load every 20 minutes over the LoRaWAN network. And the standard heat stress indexes were calculated for a period from 5th of May to 10th of October this summer. So the impact of heat stress on the milk production calculated from heat index figures, and the cost of milk losses quantified per cow for the whole herd. All cows fitted with SmaxTex rumen boluses that record rumen temperatures data every 10 minutes. So this is what's happening here, giving the cows the boluses. So the SmaxTex rumen temperature data, and it was corrected for drinking effects, etc., extracted and assessed on an hourly basis, and over 100 cow nucleus that were picked at random to get the data collated. So this is a photo of the black globe sensor in the field. This recorded both humidity and ambient temperature combined, and on some of the days it exceeded 40 degrees centigrade. The cattle generally preferred shade from the trees rather than constructed structures. That was very obvious, and the trees are effective at blocking incoming solar radiation, moisture evaporation from their leaves, help cooling surrounding air in the evapotranspiration process. So this is what we're looking at now, is the LoRaWAN system. And this is the network where the sensor device transmits its data to be received by one or more gateways. In turn, the data is sent to the internet. So we had LoRaWAN sensors in open field, under canopy, in the sheds, which reported to the gateway. And what was interesting, we could link in through our iPhones to see what the temperatures was at any time of the day or night. So this is just a photograph of the cows. You can see the landscape there in the photograph on the left-hand side. Open paddocks, rotational platform, grazing platform, and the infrastructure where the cows are coming in and out. The bottom right is just a photograph of the dashboard in the van, really, where it says 32 degrees. I think that was on the 12th of July last year. Really, really hot day. And the photograph on the top right, there was one crossroads where there were two oak trees providing shade, and that was a very telling. That is actually a still being taken from a video. I can't play the video, unfortunately, within the PowerPoint, but this cow stood there for 5 minutes and let everybody else go by, where she was enjoying the cooler temperature under the shade, but she was obviously having a bit of stress because she was panting quite a bit, and she eventually moved on as the rest of the cows were going into the parlour for milking. This is just when we're talking about hay stress in cows, we now know that mild stress begins at between 20-25 degrees centigrade. Moderate stress begins at 25 to 29 degrees centigrade, and severe stress starts over 29 degrees centigrade. So, and in recognizing the signs of extreme weather and the stress specifically with heat, it's important to understand the effect on the cattle. And it helps recognize the importance of providing shade for cattle to minimize the impact and to look at strategic plans for combating what is going to be a very common occurrence with warmer climates in the future. One of the easiest methods to determine if cattle are heat stressed is to observe the respiration rate and panting. They can't effectively cool themselves via perspiration because they have fewer sweat glands compared to animals like horses. So they increase their respiration rate to compensate. And if you watch them and count the breathing rate and the respiration rate and the panting, if they're up to 60 pants a minute, then that cow is in distress. And some of the behaviour monitoring we did was we took a drone up on a couple of the hottest days. The cows are in one grazing paddock, and you can see there was one tree in that paddock. And you can see them congregating under the shade. Now then, they're taking advantage there of not just the shade, but that environment around the tree. And I'm going to talk here about the water transportation system in the tree, where it draws up water from the roots into the canopy through into the leaf and released in very, very small pores in the leaf called stomata as water vapor. And that in itself cools the air around it, and it cools the air under the canopy as well. And that combined with any breeze that's available on a hot day like this, and there was a breeze in this instance, it's the turbulence created by that canopy creates a buffer zone of cooler temperatures under the canopy and around the tree. So you can see them there, the cows there, trying to make the most of it. But in monitoring the cow behavior, they were obviously very uncomfortable. Very few were lying down. This is around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. And walking about, standing still, not grazing, or very, very few were grazing. And yeah, very, you could tell they're obviously unhappy. And it's a telling, very telling, the information we got through the drone footage. So here we have the summary of summer heat stress. Early onset, it started in May, 2 days of mild heat stress, but there was one day where the combined humidity temperature went to 39 degrees in May even. There was a prolonged June period of stress, and heat stress conditions were present for most of June. There was also a severe mid-July event, and a severe heat stress event lasted for several days in mid-July, likely having a severe impact on cow health and welfare due to its duration. We had a longer August bout and a late season event as well in mid-September. And the historical context, national meteorological records indicate this summer was or last summer, I should say, was one of the hottest on record. And you can see the top line there, which is severe, and that was exceeded on 2 of the days. And there's a moderate and mild line, and you can see the lines, the graph expressing the results there. Similarly here, heat stress conditions inside the sheds mirrored the pattern outside conditions, really. The bottom line is mild heat stress. The purple one is the severe one. And reduced severity. Heat stress conditions inside the sheds mirrored the pattern of outside conditions. Reduced severity, the heat stress peaks were less severe indoors than open field. And the measurement caveat, these results are likely lower than in other trials because the sheds were unstocked during the summer. The heat output from cows was not captured and would typically increase the internal heat load. So the temperature difference between open field and under canopy was somewhere in the region. It varied, but it was from 10 degrees up to over 12 to 13 degrees. The temperature difference from the sheds to open field was in the region of 7 to 8 degrees difference, cooler temperatures being out under canopy in open field. So yeah, that again, that is very telling. The tree shade impact on heat stress, full sun conditions. Here we have the purple line is full sun. The shade from the trees is the lighter blue. And you can see again, the full sun conditions exceeded the temperature on the left-hand side there. Tree shade impact on heat stress. Full sun conditions experienced several heat waves. Heat stress conditions persisted for much of June and July under tree conditions, and the conditions were much more moderate. Only mild heat stress was observed during 4 very short periods, and the cattle preference drone footage confirmed a very, very strong preference for the trees by the cows. And this is the crunch, really. I mentioned earlier, Dr. Chamberlain has made the calculations and predicted milk yield loss and financial impact. And when we're talking about sustainability and efficiencies in business, then we can start to think and consider seriously about the value of trees for shade and shelter. So predicted milk yield losses were 12.6 litres per cow over the summer under the tree shade conditions, slightly higher at 49.8 and 51.6 litres per cow in the housed conditions, but much higher, up to 179.2 litres a cow in the full sun conditions, which translates to the financial loss column per cow in the middle there. And the sheds would be £21 per cow to 22, and the canopy still £5 a cow, but in the full sun, £77 per cow, which relates as a total figure in excess of £34,000 over a period from May to end of September. So the summary and recommendations: there was a considerable amount of heat stress recorded during summer 2025, as shown on the trial, with almost a third of days suffering heat stress in unshaded locations. As has been mentioned previously, and no doubt you'll hear it again, this situation is likely to worsen in coming years as global warming increases. On the right-hand side there, you can see the days of summer, percentage of days of summer 2025, May to 1st of October, with different degrees of heat stress at 3 locations on the trial farm. So what it does show, the project does show, in a grazing system provision of adequate shade is a key mitigation measure for heat stress. And very, where mild heat stress is concerned, moderate heat stress is concerned, and the severe heat stress is concerned, you can see that the results. Now then, we were talking about cow behaviour earlier, and very, very evident where cows had access to trees. And there was one specific field where you can see the picture on the left-hand side there, mature trees, a range of mature trees, parkland trees, that were remnants of an old estate planting, if you like. There was horse chestnut, oak, sycamore. The cows were much happier. They had a lot more room obviously a lot more trees to shade under. They were a lot more content. And even the picture on the bottom right-hand corner, that is a mature hawthorn, which they were, so it does show you that the smaller trees as well provide that shelter. And the top right, as again Lindsay alluded to, with regards to browsing opportunities and fodder opportunities. And of course, when grass is short, specifically last summer, it was very noticeable that hedges and shelter belts had been browsed. And you can see the cows there browsing on willow. And, some of the farms that I work with, one in particular, they've structured their businesses in ways that they're looking at the 5 freedoms relating to the care and well-being of their animals. So the 5 freedoms being freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear or distress. And any farmer will tell you the payback for committing to meeting these standards in full will be more contented animals who will attain up to optimum levels of performance, and they'll keep productivity up. The cows need to be as comfortable as possible and to live the best life that can be provided for them. And that means a quality environment. And that means, trees are a key factor in providing that environment. And we've looked at the infrastructure. I've assessed the infrastructure at Kilford with regards to hedgerows. There are small pockets of woodland. What we need to do is look at it from an agroforestry perspective and look at the hedgerows where we can actually plant and introduce trees that will develop into mature canopy for more shelter and shade, because there are issues, of course, where there's not enough shade. What do we do? What are the mitigating, how can we combat that? So there are things that can happen, change the structure and the timing of the structure and grazing regime. So more grazing in fresh pasture during the evening, and maybe have fields where you can plant trees and accommodate the cows at certain times of the day from midday onwards at the hottest part of the day until they come in for milking. Turn them out earlier, milk earlier in the morning, turn them out earlier into the grazing pasture, then move them on into the tree environment, etc. So there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of talk about bringing them into the barns. Yep, that is an opportunity. But again, there you'd have to buffer feed, which is a cost. There would need to be some kind of airflow coming through, so probably some kind of misting system with waters, a pipeline or fans even, which again is an energy cost, etc. So there are things to be done, but the opportunity now through some of the schemes that are available, the SFS is open now with the opportunity to put a plan together for tree planting. So something like this must be thought about, or should be thought about integrating trees into the farming system. But also you've got others, you've got Family Bro, which is an excellent scheme. You've got to be quick on the draw with that one. Because it's sought after. Woodland Trust do a lot of really good work with regards to agroforestry, and there's an opportunity there to get advice and look at the infrastructure on the farm. So there's a lot of assistance out there, and of course as a Farming Connect as well. So an opportunity for you to have one-to-one surgeries, etc., in drawing these plans together. So there's a lot of opportunity and assistance out there, like I said, and please take advantage of that, and think about where the trees are going to go. Think about your planning, and plant trees for a purpose. And like I said, and Lindsay alluded to earlier, I'll say it again, the occurrence of these drought periods and warm periods, hot periods in summer, is only going to increase. So we should be very much on the lookout for that. And it is, as one of the things that I'm being told is that it won't happen in my lifetime. I won't see them grow. I won't see the trees grow, etc. We need to think of the value of these trees and what they will be for the next generation, and future-proofing the farm, if you like. Enhance the farm and make those trees work for the farm and for future the business resilience. It's going to be very, very important. Dwi'n meddwl dyna ni.
Diolch yn fawr ti, Geraint. A hwnna'n adeg. Os ti eisiau stopio rhannu dy sgrin, fel bod pawb yn gallu gweld ni. No, that was really interesting. And thank you to the work of Farming Connect. Really, I think kind of speaking to some of my colleagues from the NFFN, across the UK, they're quite envious of Farming Connect, and the fact that the advice is available. you could have undertaken demonstration work like this to sort of inform management practices, which is great to see. And from the example that you've just presented, sort of seeing firsthand the effects of heat stress on the animal, but also how that translates then to sort of economic penalties for the farm. I think that's really interesting, and be able to kind of quantify, what the penalty really is per cow, and what that means, for the profitability and turnover for a given year or in the long term is really interesting. So yeah, diolch yn fawr ti. Thank you very much for that. We will go for, we've got about 12 minutes or so for questions. I just want to kind of, this isn't a question but a statement which I enjoyed from Sam Osborne, who said kind of, with tree browse, think of English mustard. You might not eat a lot, but that small amount provides something important. So the message there is to provide a good mix of trees and let the animals decide what, when, and how much. And Sam has thanked the speakers for the presentation. So I think that is true, and it's a take home, certainly from my point of view, really, from listening to the presentations. It's kind of allowing animals to demonstrate natural behaviors. And I kind of, what was it? I think it was in one of your slides that said, abnormal behavior is kind of more common in abnormal environments. So kind of mimicking the kind of natural environment is key there, I guess. So looking at some of the questions, Geraint, you alluded to some of the kind of resources available, but Simon has asked, what is the best introductory resource that you could give to a livestock farmer to get them interested in agroforestry or planting more trees? Lizzie, you've got something at hand to show. You're on mute. If you want to tell us what you're showing.
I think it's the Agroforestry handbook, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you could read it with the blurring of the screen, but yeah, it's the Agroforestry handbook. This is in its second edition. The first edition was free. We've got a very good deal on it. Sadly, this one, you have to buy it. It's $14.99, but I think the online version is still free. So you can get it as a PDF. But it's got chapters on various things. And in this edition, there's a new chapter on farm woodlands, showing the benefits of actually incorporating the woodland back into the farm. Actually going back a little bit, talking really what Geraint was saying about fields and housing, there is the option of using woodlands as well in the summer, and there's a dairy farm up in Scotland that does just this. So rather than putting the cows back into the housing system, he puts them into a woodland. Yes, he's supplementary feeding them, but he's using round feeders and putting them in among the trees, and that seems to be pretty successful as well. And I also noticed on the farm, Geraint, that you were looking at, there is one place on this farm. Yes, the fields need more trees, but that long trackway, my goodness, that would benefit from an alleyway of trees along it, shading the cows as they move out from field to farm.
Yeah, we are actually looking at paddock structure boundaries, which are set more or less. The track structures, so that's an obvious place to introduce.
It really is. Yeah, it really is, because it's a very good way almost of getting trees in without really compromising too much on land used, if you like. And we know the benefits of this. For example, in a city situation, the surface temperature can be around 50 degrees for people walking on open surfaces with no shade. And when you put trees into that scenario, it goes down to about 20 degrees. So they're not just getting heat on their backs, they're getting heat being radiated up from these warm soils, which of course is why they're not lying down as well when they're in the field. Anyway,
And just to go back to the question raised for the farmer, I'd look at go back to assess what there is already, start to build on that, and it's like a jigsaw. You can easily start to put things together then, rather than you have a blank canvas. And just one thing on the opening the woodlands up. Yeah, I agree. But in talking to farmers, especially with the larger herds, when they are getting cows in for milking and they're in the wood, it's sometimes a bit of a problem to get some of the cows out. So, when under schedule and time constraints, etc., then there are issues. But obviously, yeah, it's an opportunity, and probably should be looked at further.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll kind of just plug the Nature Friendly Farming Network as well. If you visit our website, there's a whole load of resources, reports and booklets that kind of not specifically on trees, but kind of they do mention trees and the value of kind of nature friendly farming and what that means for your business, and the wider environment as well. And it is free to join the Nature Friendly Farming Network as well. You can do so online as a public supporter or a farmer member or a supporting organisation as well. And someone in the comments has mentioned, in terms of support, not to forget about Stump Up for Trees as well. So they're based in South East Wales, so check them out.
Yeah, apologies. I should have mentioned them. I had it down the list. It was last on the list, but I should have mentioned them. So, yeah, it's a very good resource there as well.
Okay.
And agroecology as well.
In the follow-up email, we might send a list of useful kind of resources, something to consider. Someone has asked a question, around sort of acorns, kind of and acorn poisoning last year was a very bad year for that, and kind of trying to integrate more native tree species into our farming systems. How do we balance that with some of the adverse effects maybe in terms of animal health and welfare? Lindsay, I don't know whether you want to have a first stab at that and how you would kind of allay some of the fears around acorn poisoning.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and a very timely one, given, as you say, the season we just had. It's a little bit to unpack. They're not poisonous per se. And when we look at transhumance farming, so people who are not fixed in one place, but they're actually traveling with their animals through the landscape, they target acorns as an important fodder. And the critical thing is that they limit their intake. So the animals can eat acorn. All of our animals can eat a certain amount of acorns, but too many, that's where the problem is at. And of course, that's different from animal to animal. Clearly, pigs are not in this equation. And the challenge is, on top of that, is that we don't have a pasture every year. So the animals aren't necessarily understanding the rhythms of the landscape where they can learn when to stop. So we have to implement these things, if you like, both to recognise when we have a pasture and recognise which animals are most at risk. Of course, back in the day, and my mum used to tell me this, as a kid, she used to get sent out and she could get a penny a sack for harvesting acorns for the pigs. That doesn't happen anymore. So these are not being used for the resource that they genuinely are. And we only have to look at Spain to see how they benefit from acorns and pigs. They've got a whole industry that's built around acorns. So we have to recognize that they're not a poison per se, but it's the quantity, and then being aware that when we do get a pasture, that we manage the animals and access to those particular fields or areas of fields. I think that's the best that I can get to, because we have a very long relationship of oak trees in meadows. So this is not, if it was an out and out problem, that very long relationship wouldn't exist. We've been able to manage this in the past, and we can do so in the future through observation and sensitivity to these pinch points.
Yeah, and just there are things you can do. I think first of all, it was very evident on the trees in looking at the trees during the summer, the higher flower percentage of flowers and fruiting as well. So you can if you take notice and take a look at those, but also things like, well, the easiest thing is to electric fence that buffer, that area off. If it's a woodland edge and that buffer zone, just fence it, electric fence it off. It's only for a very short period of weeks because those acorns will rot down and they'll lose their that poison effect. It's I think it's like a drug really. Once the animal gets into starting to eat them, they tend to gorge on them and stuff. I've heard as well, obviously you can rake them up. It depends on the size of the area, etc. If it's an individual tree, rake them up. But also I've heard some farmers have been throwing what was left on the hay shed floor over them, covering them with old hay, and so that deters that grazing element to an extent. So it's about being vigilant, really. And yeah, we were caught out. One thing that happened this year was there was a very early storm where a lot of the acorns came down earlier than usual. I think that had a detrimental effect. But I think there's a relation here as well with woodland management as a forgotten heritage, in that because the knowledge and skills have dwindled in a way because the focus has been on food production, and rightly so. But that part of woodland management where there was hedge laying, where there was selective thinning, there was stuff going on in the woodland, was woven into that farming calendar. But obviously that's been lost. And in that, the seeing and taking note of seed masts, etc., was part of that. So that's been lost in a way, and hopefully we can get that back. But there are things that can be done. Just
I
be
couldn't
vigilant.
agree more.
Yeah.
Actually, Geraint, and that cuts both ways as well, because there used to be a practice, and particularly in the Midlands, where stock used to be put into ash woodlands in particular, and once the leaves had dropped, that was seen as a valuable food source. So the cattle would go into the woodlands and they would clean up the ash leaves that had dropped for the autumn. And there's real evidence now that that is a way of managing ash dieback. It might not completely stop it, but given that the spores are overwintering in that layer of dead leaves, the trial that I showed you in Northern Ireland, they're demonstrating that that's holding the ash dieback in control. So it can cut both ways. The animals are giving back just by cleaning up the leaves.
Great. We're running out of time. Shall we extend for another 5 minutes just to go?
Yeah, that's fine.
A couple of questions. So if we can keep the answers brief. So there's a question around, would you recommend making tree hay from willow, and does it retain the natural tannins that are natural wormers as well? Do you want to take a shot?
Well, I pondered this a lot about willow. I'm sorry, this is not a short yes or no answer. I've been thinking a lot about this because quite a lot of the recent research has been done on willow, and there are a lot of interesting things to talk about willow. And there is a whole industry that has a keen interest. So the biofuel industry have a keen interest on the opportunities that come from feeding willow. The challenge is that historically it's not one of the trees that was the preferred fodder. And if you go back into historical resources, then willow was actually quite frowned upon. Now, I should say that the willows that we're talking about back then are not the cultivars that we're talking about now. You know, the breeding of willows has moved on quite dramatically. But if we're talking about really good fodder trees, we're talking ash, we're talking elm, wych elm, and we know those are compromised currently, but they are the traditional fodder trees and for very good reason. And then you might add elm into that. If we're going specifically for a high protein fodder, then you simply cannot do better than mulberry as a protein fodder. It's a low tannin tree, so more of the protein is available to the animal, although it will be rumen digested protein, but that is really an exceptional tree for protein in particular. The benefits of the tannins do go down when you wilt a plant. When you wilt anything, the level of tannins reduces in that plant. But you might argue that, for example, with parasites, if you're feeding tree hay in the winter, you know, maybe the problem with parasites, because that goes down in the winter, it's not actually that much of a problem. So you might lose the benefits for the protein quality, but perhaps the parasite is less of an issue there. If you ensile tree fodder, then silage maintains tannin quality. So you could maintain it that way. But if we're talking specifically about willow, it's not a great tree to ensile. And I can speak from personal experience here. I've just sent off a load of trials, different species. Now there are issues with the acids that are produced. You can make it a better silage if you include formic acid, but as I learned to my cost preparing them in my living room, they also produce carbon monoxide, and it sent my carbon monoxide alarm off on one. So yeah, it's not I'm sorry, Reese, it's not a simple answer, but there's more to learn, much more to learn. But if you want to include willow, then blend it, maybe mix it with other tree species.
Just my quick two penneth into that. I think with climate change, we need to be looking at alternative species as well. We have delivered one project down in Pembrokeshire at Penkedney Farm, looking at a diverse range of species, but we've tested 6 non-native species, I should say. The information for that will be on the webinar. It's very interesting. On the Farming Connect website, I should say, sorry. Yeah, we should be looking to that, more diverse tree species and more opportunities. It depends on palatability. There's a lot involved, isn't there, Lindsay? So, yeah, watch this space.
There is actually a question on that, kind of, you know, thinking of climate change and drought, increasing temperature, you know, kind of any thought on, you know, particular resilient trees to plant, you know, kind of just to name a few, or maybe that's an unfair question. It kind of depends where you are and what the circumstances are.
I mean, can I be a bit of a stick in the mud here? I hear what you're saying, Geraint, but for the moment, I think the problem just for now is that we have too few trees in the landscape, and that the more trees we have, the more they support each other. There may come a point where we need these other trees, and it likely will happen. But just for now, I think we've still got the opportunity to maintain the species that we have, albeit in bigger numbers. And the value of doing that is that we have a whole biodiversity ecological system that relies upon these trees. And so we're continuing to support those and enriching, let's say, maintaining what we have for longer before we start resorting to more exotic species. One of the issues that I have with the exotic species, and it's not an absolute no-no, because I do recognize that we may well have to be moving in this direction. But I do have real concerns, for example, with the promotion of eucalyptus and the real risk of fire that comes along with those kinds of species, but also with things like acacia, where although it's a recognized fodder source elsewhere, it's actually quite unpalatable. And in scenarios, so trials that have been done in Europe where acacia has been one of the trees that's been offered, it's actually been the only tree that hasn't been browsed. So there would have to be some kind of adaptation and understanding of what percentage these trees should be as part of the diet. But the biggest issue for me with the acacia is that it's a suckering tree. And if we get it wrong, we've potentially unleashed a beast in the landscape. So there are factors that are much wider and beyond that we have to consider. And as I say, it's not a no-no, but there's a landscape responsibility as well that comes with these choices.
Well, thank you. I'll just one last question. Do we know if silver pasture improves ewe fertility?
Well, I'm going to say simply yes, but then that would depend on the nutritional status and the health status of the ewe in the first place, and the temperature regulation status of the ewe in the first place. So if you've got, for example, there have been trials done in New Zealand where they have very dry summer conditions, and trying to maintain ewes on minimal pasture has led to low fertility. But when you bring in tree fodder, browse, so they very much practice this cut and drop
I think
fresh.
you muted.
Can you not hear me anymore?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all good.
Well, hopefully that gets recorded. But if you introduce tree fodder into that scenario, then absolutely fertility is greater.
Brilliant. Gareth, have you done any farming connecting any research into this, or is it that you might?
No, but just just to replicate the project at Kilford, that high temperatures and etc. It can affect ewe fertility. It can affect ram fertility, and the same with suckler cows and the suckler calf. It has a knock-on effect, if you like. That suckler calf, for instance, if it's not getting the growth, it won't get the growth rate that it should be getting if the milk yields are down. That in turn will mean probably feeding out the bag at the end of the summer or whatever, just to get it up to a sale condition. And another step forward, a knock-on effect would be to affect the carbon footprint for the farm. So there's a lot involved, and similarly, I think from an agroforestry perspective, when you've got to be careful in your planting and designing. We're talking about tree alleys, etc. We did have a very good project up in Bangor where we grew brassicas and in tree alleys, which proved very successful. We were fattening lambs off the hill on those, and that was a very successful project. And there we had to be very careful with light levels, tree canopy, etc. Sorry, I'm just mentioning this because I saw one question asking about it. Mention it very quickly. So it is viable, but we need to be careful about the density of planting and how often we thin out. I think the Bangor, the Henvice site now is down to 50 trees per hectare, but a very, very viable site as an agroforestry site.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. I also saw it pop up, and the answer is, that you do have to manage the trees. And I think often we don't talk enough about this, that when you plant trees, that comes with a level of management. And as Geraint says, the density, but also the species that you choose, whether they have more upright growth or a bigger canopy, these will all have an impact on light levels. And I'm really struggling to remember what Jim McAdam says about this ash silvipastoral system. I can't remember if it was somewhere between 7 and 12 years before the grass was impacted. Grass growth was influenced by canopy. But there is also a knock-on effect with sugar content, of course, and that's the other thing we can't ignore, is that when you drop the sunlight, you get lower sugar, but as a consequence, perhaps the protein levels are higher in the grasses.
We do have another webinar coming up and a roadshow of sorts where we're producing a booklet with Niels Caulfield, the soil health expert, titled "The Weatherproof Farm," and a section of that concentrates on agroforestry and how that kind of increases soil health, which then translates to kind of greater yield and productivity. So we'll park that maybe, and it's more reason to maybe join the NFFN and kind of keep an eye out for some of the events we've got on over the next few weeks and months. I think we got to. You worked overtime now, Geraint and Lindsay. I just wanted to say, thank you so much. It's been a really fascinating evening, lots to go through, but you've kind of presented it in a really kind of digestible and informative way. And I think it's been kind of reflected in a number of questions that have come through. So diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. But I'll just ask you quickly before we finish, like kind of in 30 seconds, if you can sort of, kind of, is there a sort of final takeaway or one piece of advice that you would like to part with those here this evening? So Geraint, if we start with you.
Well, definitely. I think alluding to what we've been saying this evening, my father always said that happy animals are productive animals. If we want our animals to thrive and not just survive, then we've got to plan ahead and we've got to look after the welfare. And trees are a big part of that equation.
And Lindsay?
Well, Geraint's taken the words out of my mouth. Because, I started out as a stockman, and I know that fantastic feeling that comes with looking at healthy animals and recognizing what contributes to that kind of health, and trees are critical. And maybe as a post comment to the final question that we looked at, we're going into a world where business as usual doesn't apply. That field with no trees in may not be producing any grass at all after the first cut, if we're lucky to get that one after the wet winters, that we're getting. So, maybe accepting that whilst there may be an element of trade-off in grass yield with trees in the field, that may end up saving the grass field.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you both for your passion and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise. Diolch yn fawr, very, very grateful. So we have gone 15 minutes over time, but it's expected, I think, with the topic that we've discussed. But thank you very much. Thank you everyone for participating and asking such great questions. And we'll call it a night, and we'll see you at the next one. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Keep safe. Stawch.